Hello, today we're going to talk about evaluating moral arguments and trying to look at how we can find an argument that is true, make sure that we know that argument is true, and how we can argue with other people and make our arguments even more successful than we think that they are. So let's look at evaluating moral arguments. And we're going to look at moral reasoning. Now, when we look at moral reasoning, what we have to do is we have to look at critical reasoning, and it is critical reasoning that is applied to moral arguments. So moral reasoning involves critical thinking and critical reasoning. Um, it also is the careful and systematic evaluation of statements and arguments that we have to look at. Now, statements and arguments. In an argument, every argument has a statement. A statement is that claim that something is either true or something is or false. Now, look at these following statements. These are all statements. Murder is wrong. 1 plus 1 is 2. And Shakespeare wrote The Tempest. Now, in these statements, I don't know if we can argue with those or not. Can we argue with murder is wrong? Can we argue with 1 plus 1 is 2? And can we argue with Shakespeare writing The Tempest? Now, in statements and arguments, when at least one statement attempts to provide reasons for believing another statement, then we have an argument. So one statement has to provide reasons for us to believe another statement, and that will start an argument. Now, the statement that's being supported by the other statements is called the conclusion. Now, the supporting statements, what we call those the premises. So a statement is a premise, statement is a premise, and then we have the conclusion. So let's look at identifying arguments. Now, in arguments, we all have something to prove. An argument always has something to prove. So the most reliable way to look at identifying arguments to see if it really is an argument is to look at the conclusion first. Now, then we have to establish just whether there's a connection that links the premises to the conclusion. Now, a cluster of unrelated claims is not an argument. So I want you to look at these statements and see if this is going to be an argument or a non-argument. Okay, the number of abortions performed in the state is increasing. That's the premise one. More and more women say they favor greater access to abortion. That's premise two. I disapprove of abortion. That is the conclusion. So is this an argument or is it not an argument? Well, I don't think it's an argument because the statements there, they don't support each other and they don't support the conclusions. So it's not an argument. Now, the number of abortions performed in the state is increasing. More and more women say that they favor greater access to abortion. Clearly, the trend in the state is among women is toward greater acceptance of abortion. Now, this is an argument because there's a clear conclusion. The conclusion is the trend in the state among women is toward greater acceptance of abortion. That's the conclusion. Now let's look at the premises. The number of abortions performed in the state is increasing. Does that support the conclusion? The second premise, more and more women say they favor greater access to abortion. Does that support the conclusion? Both of them do, and then the conclusion is clearly stated. So yes, this is an argument because all of the other statements are supported by each other. Now, I want you to remember that because can give a cause or a reason. Now, when it's a cause, it's not an argument. When it's a reason, it is an argument. So don't confuse reasons and arguments. So let's look at these reasons and arguments. Now, Jenny's car didn't start because the battery was dead. That's a cause. Now remember, causes are not arguments. Jenny didn't start her car because Jenny thought the car's ignition was rigged with a bomb. This is a reason. So this can be an argument. Now we can't argue with the first one because her car battery's dead. It's not going to start. Then we look at the reasoning one, and we think that she thinks that the ignition was rigged with a bomb. That's a reason. Now we can argue with that because it's not a very good reason to begin with. Now, there are two forms of argument. All right. Let's look at whether this is an argument or a non-argument as far as reasons and causes. All right. Jeannie believes lying is always wrong because that's what her parents taught her. Now, that's a cause, right? Now, Jeannie believes lying is always wrong because deception is a vice. Now, one of those is a reason and one of those is a cause. Now, there are two forms of arguments. The first form of argument is what we call a deductive argument, and these gives logical, conclusive support to its conclusion. Now, a deductive argument gives conclusive support, but it's not always, it's always conclusive. We can't determine or argue with it, basically. Now, an inductive argument is a little bit different because it offers probable support to its conclusion. And there's a little bit of a leeway to whether we determine it to be an argument or not, because an inductive argument gives probable support. Now, let's look at these two arguments. Now, here's a valid deductive argument. All human beings are mortal. Now, Socrates is a human being, therefore Socrates is mortal. Now, a valid argument with true premises, such as the example above, is said to be a sound argument. Now, deductive arguments, an invalid deductive argument would be, if Maria walks to work, then she will be late. She'll not walk to work, therefore she will not be late. Now, that's invalid because we can't say what's going to happen to Maria on her way walking to work, okay? Or if she doesn't walk to work. Now, if she doesn't even go, she's going to be late. So that is an invalid deductive argument. Now, strong inductive arguments are strong, and it gives probable support, all right? So let's look at this probable support that we're talking about inductive arguments here. Now, the following is an inductive argument, and it's strong, so let's look at it. 90% of men at this college have combined SAT scores over 400. Therefore, Julio, a student at this college, probably has a combined SAT score over 1400. Now, that's a strong inductive argument. Now, there is a reasonable chance that his SAT score is going to be over 1400 because 90% of the men at the college have a score over 1400, but there's still that small 10%. So, but now that's what we're talking about as the probable strong support. Now let's look at this weak one. All right, a weak inductive argument. A weak inductive argument is if we would say 10% of the men at this college have combined SAT scores over 1400. So therefore, Julio, who's a student, probably has a combined SAT score over 1400. That's not true. He probably does not because he's in the 10%. So you're looking at percentages here. You're looking at actually, you know, what are the odds of him having over 1400? It's only 1 in 10. So let's look at these implied premises. Now, when we look at an argument, we have to evaluate whether the argument is explicitly stated. We have to evaluate, when the following applies. If there seems to be a logical gap between the premises, remember premise 1, premise 2, conclusion. If there's a gap between the two premises, then it's not going to be an argument. Now, the missing material is if the missing material is not a common sense assumption. So if the missing material isn't common sense, then it's not going to be implied. Now, the premise that you provide in place of an implied premise should make the argument valid, and it should be plausible and it should be fitting. So let's look at these moral and non-moral statements. Now, a moral statement, remember, is affirming that an action is right or wrong. Let's look at these two statements. Capital punishment is wrong, and Jenna should not have lied. Now, these are moral statements because what we're doing is we are making a judgment on morality, and we are making a statement about it. Now, this is a non-moral statement. Many people think that capital punishment is wrong, and Jenna did not lie. These are non-moral statements. Now, moral statements and moral arguments should offer at least one premise that is a moral statement. Now, without a moral premise, we can't make a moral argument. We can't establish what ought or what should be based solely on what is. So non-moral statements in moral arguments should offer at least one premise that is a non-moral statement. So we can't infer a moral conclusion from a moral premise unless we have a non-moral premise that links the two. Now, if you have a moral statement in premise one and a moral statement in premise two, then it's just going to look like your argument is about preaching or trying to get them to understand your point of view with two moral statements, and that's not a good argument. Now, to test a moral premise, we've got to look for a counterexample. Now, let's look at this premise. Causing a person's death is wrong. Now, that is a moral statement. Now, to look at this and test this premise, we've got to look at all the circumstances where it may be morally acceptable to cause a person's death. So can you think of any situation where it might be okay to cause a person's death? I know some of you might say in self-defense, in war, or to save thousands of other people. Now, when we look at non-moral premises, we have to ensure that non-moral premises are supported by good reasons. It's always worth the effort. Now, if you look at a non-moral statement, we have to keep the following in mind. We have to use reliable resources. We have to beware when evidence conflicts, and we have to let our reasoning and our moral reasoning rule. Now, bad arguments come in many shapes and many sizes, but they all share in common one of the following two problems. At least one of the premises is false, and the conclusion doesn't follow its premises. Now, what I want you to do now is to look at the rest of the slides as far as fallacies go. And I have several examples of bad arguments using fallacies, and these are used every day in our media, every day by politicians, every day by people that we come in contact with. These are fallacies. What I want you to do is look at all these fallacies in the following slides, and then watch the video about the common fallacies in Blackboard. Thank you.